What's the difference between you and thou? Is there a difference? I'm going to save you a little suspense. Yes, there is a difference, and it's so cool, and I cannot wait to tell you about it. But first, let's get a little business out of the way. Hi, welcome to Shakespeare Made Clear. I'm Dame Sarah Spring. I'm a New York-based actor and Shakespeare coach. I wrote an ebook. It is a free guide to Shakespeare's verse, and it's all about finding the hidden directions that Shakespeare puts in the verse for his actors and how you can find that and use it to elevate your performance more than you ever thought possible. So do not miss out. Download that at the link below. I also offer one-on-one coaching. That's also available in the link below. So check it out, and without much further ado, let's get started. So what's the difference between you and thou? Now, I'm going to put on my grammar hat for a second here, so don't freak out. If you speak a foreign language like French or German or Spanish, you know that there's a formal version of the pronoun you and an informal version of the pronoun you. Now, in English, we don't have this, but we used to. And counterintuitively, you was the formal version of the pronoun. Thou was the informal version. Mind blown, right? So you could be expressed in the informal version as either thou, if it's the subject of the sentence, like thou knowst the mask of night is on my face, or thee, if it's the object of the sentence, like get thee to a nunnery. The word your can be expressed as either thy or thine, depending on whether the word following it starts with a consonant or a vowel. Kind of like how we use the word a or an today, where you use a if it's before a consonant, but an if it's before a vowel. So you would say thy face, but you would say thine eyes. And the word yours is always expressed informally as thine. Okay, I can take off my grammar hat now. We're done with that. So why does this matter? Well, because whether a character is using you or thou is going to clue you into relationship and status. And those are two of the building blocks of acting, the building blocks of scene work, knowing the relationship and the status of the characters in the scene that you're working on. And this is something that I had to teach myself. So few people know about this that I have had to teach my teachers this. And I'm kind of jealous of you because you're going to be so far ahead of where I was when I began because you already know this. So yay. Also, this isn't unique to Shakespeare. So if you're working on a play by one of Shakespeare's contemporaries, another Elizabethan or Jacobean playwright, the same rules are going to apply. So it's going to help you there too. You is the default pronoun in Shakespeare. It's more formal, it's more polite, it's public facing, although at times it can create kind of a sense of distance in a scene depending on the context. Thou, on the other hand, is the more emotional pronoun. So generally speaking, its use falls into two categories. It can either be used to express intimacy and affection for a loved one or a friend, or it can be used out of anger or to speak down to someone. Thou is also used to speak to people who are either absent, sleeping, or dead, and it's used to speak to abstract entities, like if you're talking to the idea of truth or the idea of love. For example, in King Lear, Edmund says, "Thou nature art my goddess." He's speaking to the idea of nature, so he uses the word thou. The use of the word thou increases at the emotional hotspots of the play. And if a character is starting to lose control of their faculties, like King Lear when he begins going mad, they start using thou more often and indiscriminately. There's also a gender divide when it comes to the use of the word thou. Men are far more likely to use the word thou than women are. And I find this fascinating because think about it, thou is the more emotional pronoun. And even today, if we have men who are running for public office, they are allowed to get up on the campaign trail and shout and scream and curse and wave their arms in the air. But if a woman does the same thing, people would not vote for her. A woman has to be more composed, more in control of her feelings at all times. Things haven't changed all that much. Husbands and wives and lovers use thou with each other, but usually only when they're expressing their love for each other. If they move on to some other topic of conversation, they tend to revert to the formal you. Now, the exception to this rule is Romeo and Juliet. They almost exclusively use the informal thou with each other, but that's because they're so in love. Going back to the gender divide for a minute, men traditionally were the ones who would initiate use of the word thou in romantic situations. If a woman initiated use of the word thou, then that was a big no-no. She was being subversive. She was being unladylike because, it's unladylike to make the first move. Go figure. So if you do see a circumstance where a woman is using thou with a man first, take note of it. For example, Goneril and Regan in King Lear use thou to speak to Edmund, even though he doesn't use thou to speak to them. Or in A Midsummer Night's Dream, when Titania is under the love potion, she uses thou to speak to Bottom when she's chasing him around, even though he doesn't use it to speak to her. Thou can also be used between platonic friends, but the gender gap is still present. So, for example, in Much Ado About Nothing, Benedick and Claudio speak to each other using the word thou, but Beatrice and Hero don't. And while we're on the subject of Much Ado About Nothing, when Benedick is speaking to Beatrice, he alternates at times between using you and thou because it's a tentative relationship. But Beatrice never uses thou with Benedick. She only speaks to him using the formal you, keeping a kind of distance there, except in her soliloquy, What Fire Is in Mine Ears. When she first realizes that Benedick loves her, she speaks using the word thou, but only because he isn't there, only because she knows that he can't hear her. And I just love this because Beatrice is so witty. She is so smart and funny and beautiful, but she's guarded. She is using her humor to keep herself from being vulnerable. And it's just so relatable, and it's part of why we love this character. Now, remember, thou can also be used to insult someone. So in Twelfth Night, for example, there's a line where Sir Toby is speaking to Sir Andrew, and he's trying to egg him on into picking a fight with Cesario, or Viola in disguise. And he says to him, If thou thouest him some thrice, it shall not be amiss. Now, most modern productions cut this line because nobody knows what it means. But to the Elizabethan audience, they knew exactly what that meant. Because if you use the word thou with someone who you're not close to, who is a social equal, them's fighting words. He's clearly picking a fight. Also, in The Winter's Tale, after Hermione has died, Paulina confronts the king, Leontes, and tells him that his wife has died and that it is all his fault, and she chooses to use the word thou with him. Now, normally, this is a huge no-no. You do not call the king thou and expect to live to tell the tale. But in this moment, Paulina doesn't care. She calls him thou to insult him. She calls him a tyrant. She needs him to know exactly the weight of what he has done, and she doesn't care about the consequences. And that is just another example of how ballsy the character Paulina is and why we love her so much. Also, I have a full video tutorial on that monologue if you're interested. I'll link it at the end of the video. Thou can also be used between parents and children. Now, children virtually never use the word thou to speak to their parents. They always use the more formal, more respectful you, even as adults. But parents can use thou or you with their children depending on the context. So, for example, at the beginning of Hamlet, Gertrude speaks to Hamlet using the word thou. And this can be seen as her being sweet and affectionate, or it could be seen as her patronizing him, because let's be real, sometimes moms be like that. Now, there's another really interesting parent-child dynamic going on in Hamlet as well. In Act 1, Scene 3, Polonius is speaking to both of his children, to Laertes and Ophelia. When he speaks to Laertes, he uses the informal thou. He is super affectionate and lovey-dovey with his son. But the moment he starts speaking to Ophelia, he switches to the formal you, and he only speaks to her using the formal you. Now, I don't want to read too much into it, but from this, I think it's pretty clear that he has a favorite child. And if you didn't know the difference between you and thou, you might not pick up that this dynamic is going on in this scene. And it's super juicy and interesting to play with. Now, if you come across a scene where two characters are speaking to each other, but one is using the formal you and the other is using the informal thou, that is a dead giveaway that there is some sort of power imbalance at play. Now, it could be that an upper class character, like a king, queen, or nobleman, is speaking to a lower class character, like a working man or a clown or something. Or it could be that it's a case of unrequited love, like between Silvius and Phoebe in As You Like It. Or it could be an an intimate relationship that's currently undergoing some kind of conflict. Like at the beginning of As You Like It, Rosalind and Celia are speaking to each other. Now, Celia and Rosalind are cousins, they're best friends, but Celia's father has just usurped Rosalind's father, and so that puts Rosalind in kind of a precarious situation. Celia speaks to Rosalind using thou because she's trying to reassure her that, no, you're still my best friend, I love you no matter what my father just did. And Rosalind is understandably a little more distanced from Celia at this point, and so she is using the word you with her. Sometimes you'll have a character who switches between using you and thou with someone in the same scene, sometimes even within the same line. And when this happens, keep an eye out. It is always super juicy because there has been a shift in relationship or tone in some way. For example, at the beginning of Richard III is trying to woo Lady Anne over the corpse of her dead father-in-law, who Richard killed. Oh, by the way, Richard also killed her husband. So she understandably hates him, and she is spitting thou at him over and over again. She just says thou this, thou that, and uses all sorts of insults with him. But he somehow manages to win her over. And you can tell the exact moment that he does so because she starts using you with him. Like, oh, that's so cool. When a character switches between using you and thou in the same scene, sometimes it can even be a sign of a Freudian slip. So, for example, let's take a look at this passage from Love's Labour's Lost. Now, just a little bit of context first. The young king of Navarre has taken an oath with his buddies that they are not going to let any girls into court for 3 years. They are just going to focus on learning, studying, being chaste. Yeah, okay. And basically no girls allowed. However, the Princess of France arrives on official state business from her father, and so he has to see her, but he doesn't allow her into court. But the more that he gets to speak with her and get to know her, he starts falling in love with her. And in this passage, you can see that he is using the formal you with her, except every now and then he seems to slip into using thee, thy, thou. And it's because he is falling in love with her and he cannot contain his affection. Oh, I just love that. That's so cool. Anyway, I know that was a lot to take in. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you want to learn more, I highly recommend picking up a copy of You and Thou in Shakespeare by Penelope Friedman. I cannot express to you how much of a debt I owe to this book for this video. It is a great read. I highly recommend that any Shakespearean actor have this on their shelves. It's a quick read, but it is so insightful. I'm not even getting paid for this. It's just a really good book. So yeah, pick up a copy of that if you want. Thank you so much for watching. This has been such a thrill. I know that a lot of this was confusing, so if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And also, if you've come across any other scenes where you and thou are used in an interesting way, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. So I'll do my best to respond to any comments. And thanks again for watching. Like and follow. It'll help me give you more videos like this, and have a great day.